Hello, my name is Cassia, and for as long as I can remember, my family made sure I knew one thing. I didn't belong. It wasn't just the lies, the manipulation, or the favoritism. It was the way my father looked at me like I was a burden, the way my sister smiled every time she got away with something at my expense, the way my mother tried to protect me, but never enough to actually stop it. And then, one day, it all fell apart. My sister framed me. My father didn't hesitate. He threw me out like I was nothing. And as I walked away, she laughed, saying the words I'll never forget. Good luck, loser. I had nothing. No home, no safety, no family to turn to. But what they didn't know was that in just a few days, everything would change. Because karma has a funny way of coming back around. What happens when the people who betrayed you finally get what they deserve? When the mother who once stayed silent decides to fight back. The house on Meadowbrook Lane had always looked inviting from the outside. A classic two-story, painted a soft shade of blue, with white shutters and a perfectly manicured lawn. It was the kind of place that neighbors admired, the kind that suggested warmth and love within its walls. But for me, it had never been a home. I stepped out of my car, gripping the handle of my suitcase a little too tightly. The weight of old memories settled on my shoulders the moment I looked up at the front door. I had spent years trying to convince myself that coming back wouldn't feel this way, that I had outgrown the unease that crawled up my spine every time I set foot on this porch. But it was always the same. I took a slow breath and stepped inside. The scent of lavender and polished wood filled the air, familiar but suffocating. My mother, Serafina, was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. She turned at the sound of the door, her expression brightening with relief. "Cassia, sweetheart, you're here." Her embrace was warm, the only true comfort I had ever known in this house. But before I could fully sink into it, I heard another voice, light, sing-song, and laced with just the right amount of false surprise. Well, well, look who finally decided to grace us with her presence. Ophelia. I turned to see her standing in the living room, perched on the armrest of the couch, like a queen surveying her kingdom. She had always been beautiful, effortlessly charming, the kind of woman who could make a room gravitate toward her without even trying. And she knew it. "Still dressing like a corporate drone, I see," she mused, eyeing my navy blazer and pressed slacks with thinly veiled amusement. I ignored her, setting my suitcase down beside the stairs. "Where's Dad?" The question barely left my lips before his voice rang from the study. "Cassia!" Magnus Calloway emerged, his presence as imposing as ever. He was a tall man, built like he had been carved from stone, with sharp features that softened only for Ophelia. He barely looked at me before gesturing toward the dining table. "Sit. We need to talk." A sinking feeling settled in my stomach, but I obeyed. I had spent a lifetime following his orders, after all. Ophelia trailed after us, a smirk dancing on her lips. She slid into the chair across from me, resting her chin on her hand like she was about to enjoy a performance. Then, with a perfectly executed pout, she said, "Cassia broke my laptop." I blinked. "What?" "My MacBook." She tilted her head. "The one Dad bought me last month. I found it cracked this morning." I let out a sharp breath, trying to suppress the immediate surge of frustration. "I didn't touch your laptop, Ophelia." But she was already turning to Magnus, her voice laced with practiced disappointment. "She was in my room last night. Maybe she knocked it over and didn't notice." Magnus barely hesitated. His gaze locked onto me, cold and unreadable. "Is that true?" I felt the anger rise in my chest, the same anger I had swallowed down my entire life. "No, it's not. I wasn't anywhere near her room." Serafina stepped forward, concern etched into her features. "Magnus, you can't just assume—" "I don't assume," he cut her off sharply. "I know when someone refuses to take responsibility for their actions." His eyes bore into mine, as if daring me to argue. "You need to be more careful, Cassia. If you can't respect other people's property, you'll have to face the consequences. I clenched my fists beneath the table. And what consequences are those? He leaned back, folding his arms. No more access to the family accounts. You're on your own financially. I stared at him, disbelief slamming into me. You can't be serious. Ophelia gave a tiny, satisfied shrug. Oh, I'm very serious, Magnus said. Maybe this will finally teach you some accountability. The injustice of it all made my pulse hammer in my ears. But I had been here before, fighting a battle that had already been decided before I even stepped onto the field. There was no point. I pushed back my chair and stood. Fine. Without another word, I turned and walked out. I didn't stop until I reached the backyard, the crisp evening air cooling my heated skin. I took slow, measured breaths, trying to force my emotions back into place. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a message from my assistant at work. Instead, it was my boss. I hesitated before answering. Hello? Cassia. His voice was sharp. I just got out of a meeting with the partners. The email with the quarterly reports never went out. A cold dread settled in my stomach. That's not possible. I sent it last night. No, you didn't. His voice was edged with disappointment. You're up for a promotion, Cassia. This kind of mistake doesn't reflect well on you. I stopped, realization crashing over me. Ophelia. I had asked her to forward the email while I was on a client call. She had smiled and said she would, and now I closed my eyes. Look, my boss sighed. I'll try to smooth things over, but don't let this happen again. The call ended. I stood there, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers ached. She had done it on purpose, and she wasn't done yet. That evening, my colleagues came over for a small gathering, something I had planned for weeks. It was meant to be a chance to connect outside of work, a way to solidify my relationships with the partners before they made their decision about my promotion. But the moment we sat down, Magnus took the opportunity to humiliate me. She's always been a little scatterbrained, he said, smirking as he swirled the whiskey in his glass. Bright, sure, but never quite as sharp as she thinks. Ophelia laughed lightly, eyes glinting with amusement. I felt my throat tighten. My colleagues exchanged uneasy glances. I wanted to argue, to stand up for myself, but the words felt stuck. This was how it always went. I had spent my life fighting for respect in this house, but no matter what I achieved, no matter how hard I worked, they would never see me as anything but the girl who was never quite good enough. I excused myself early, my appetite long gone. Lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, the realization finally sank in. Nothing would ever change. Maybe it was time to finally walk away. I didn't expect my world to collapse overnight, but then again, I should have seen it coming. The morning sun filtered through my blinds, casting streaks of light across my room. My body felt heavy, drained from the humiliation of last night. I had barely slept, replaying my father's words, Ophelia's smirk, the quiet looks of pity from my colleagues. I had spent my whole life trying to prove I was worth more than the way they treated me. But no matter how hard I fought, they never saw me as anything more than an afterthought. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I reached for it, my heart clenching at the sight of my boss's name flashing on the screen. A voicemail. I sat up, took a deep breath, and played it. Cassia, look, I hate to do this over the phone, but the partners made their decision. Given the email issue and the missed deadline, they've decided to go with someone else for the promotion. It's nothing personal. You're still a valuable member of the team, but we need someone who can be more reliable under pressure. I barely heard the rest. My mind was already spiraling. The promotion was gone. The thing I had worked for, sacrificed sleep for, bled my energy into, ripped away, all because of one missed email. An email that I had asked Ophelia to send. I gritted my teeth, shoving the blankets aside and storming out of my room. Ophelia was in the kitchen, sipping coffee like she hadn't just sabotaged me. She glanced up lazily as I approached, her lips curling in amusement. You knew, I said, voice low and shaking. She blinked, feigning innocence. Knew what? I slammed my phone onto the counter. That email, the one I told you to forward, you didn't send it. She tilted her head, tapping a manicured nail against the rim of her mug. Oh, that. Oops. Oops. My hands curled into fists at my sides. That mistake just cost me my promotion. She sighed, setting her mug down. Cassia, you really need to stop blaming other people for your failures. It's getting old. A sharp laugh escaped me, bitter and incredulous. You think this is funny? Before she could respond, my father's voice cut through the room. What's going on in here? I turned to see Magnus standing in the doorway, his expression already set in irritation. Cassia's throwing one of her tantrums again, Ophelia said smoothly, leaning against the counter. I turned to him, swallowing down my rage. Dad, I lost my promotion because Ophelia deliberately didn't send an email I asked her to. Magnus frowned, crossing his arms. And you're sure it's her fault? Yes, she admitted it. He let out a sigh, shaking his head. Cassia, you can't keep blaming Ophelia every time something doesn't go your way. Maybe, just maybe, you're not as capable as you think you are. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Ophelia smiled sweetly behind him, her eyes gleaming with victory. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. I wanted to shake him and make him see the truth. But I knew better. Arguing with Magnus was like screaming into a void. So I turned, grabbed my phone, and walked away. That afternoon, I watched from the corner of the living room as Magnus presented Ophelia with a brand new designer handbag. A little reward for all your hard work in school, he said, ruffling her hair like she was 12 instead of a grown woman. I clenched my jaw. Hard work? She hadn't worked a day in her life. Ophelia accepted the gift with a glowing smile, casting a sideways glance at me. She was loving this, every second of it. Serafina stood near the kitchen, arms crossed, her mouth set in a tight line. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw the silent apology there, but she said nothing. She never did. I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. You really don't see it, do you? Magnus turned to me, his expression cooling. See what? This. I gestured toward Ophelia, toward the expensive gift in her hands. The way you treat us differently. She does nothing and gets rewarded. I work my ass off and I get nothing but criticism. Magnus scoffed. You wouldn't understand, Cassia. Ophelia actually works hard. I barked out a humorless laugh. Right, of course. She works so hard manipulating you. His face darkened. That's enough. Ophelia smirked behind him, lifting her new handbag in my direction like a trophy. I turned away before I did something I'd regret. That evening, Magnus stormed into the house, his face red with fury. Who scratched my car? I looked up from my book, confused. What? The side mirror is broken. There's a huge scratch on the passenger side. Someone did this, and they're going to pay for it. Ophelia, lounging on the couch with her phone, didn't even look up as she said, I saw Cassia near the car earlier. Maybe she backed into something? I shot up from my seat. Are you kidding me? I wasn't even near your damn car, Ophelia. Magnus turned to me, eyes narrowing. Is that true? I let out a sharp breath, my frustration boiling over. Yes, I had nothing to do with it. Serafina finally spoke up, stepping forward. Magnus, we don't even know if Cassia was near the car. Don't defend her, Serafina, he snapped. She needs to take responsibility for once in her life. I felt like I was suffocating. No matter what I said, no matter what I did, I was always the villain in his eyes. And then, the final blow. You're paying for the repairs, Magnus declared, out of your own savings. I stared at him, my vision blurring with disbelief. You can't be serious. But he was. He always was. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my half-packed suitcase. I should leave. I should just walk out that door and never look back. I had the means to do it. I had a good job, my own money. The only thing holding me here was the idea that someday things might change. That if I worked hard enough, proved myself enough, maybe, just maybe, he would finally see me. But tonight, I realized something I should have known a long time ago. It didn't matter. Serafina came in, hesitating in the doorway. Cassia, I'm trying, I really am. But your father, he won't listen to me. I looked at her, really looked at her. The sadness in her eyes, the quiet resignation. She had given up, and I couldn't be like her. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the handle of my suitcase. I need to leave before they take even more from me. Serafina didn't argue. She just nodded, and that was all the confirmation I needed. I should have left that night. If I had, I wouldn't have been there when everything finally collapsed. I woke up to the sound of my father's shouting, and this time, I knew it was about me. The walls of the house seemed to shake with his fury, his deep voice cutting through the morning stillness like a blade. I sat up abruptly, my pulse already racing. The argument downstairs was familiar. Too familiar. But this time, there was something sharper, something final in his tone. I swung my legs over the bed and hurried to the doorway. The moment I reached the top of the stairs, I saw them. Magnus stood in the middle of the living room, his face red with rage. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, and his jaw was so tight I thought he might break his teeth. Serafina stood a few feet away, worry etched deep into her features. And then there was Ophelia, standing just behind him, her arms crossed, her expression an eerie mixture of concern and satisfaction. She stole it! Magnus's voice thundered through the house. My watch! My Rolex is gone! My stomach dropped. I didn't need to hear the rest. I already knew where this was going. I told you. Ophelia's voice was soft, measured. She reached out, lightly touching Magnus's arm like she was trying to calm him. I saw Cassia near your office last night. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now... She let the words trail off, letting the implication sink in. My father turned toward me, his fury snapping to a new target. You! I felt the weight of his gaze like a physical force. You think I'd steal from you? I asked, my voice steady, though my hands had started shaking. Don't play innocent. Magnus's eyes burned with accusation. That watch was in my office yesterday. This morning it's gone. And now Ophelia tells me she saw you lurking around. I laughed bitterly. Lurking? Are you serious? Ophelia gave me a small, pitiful shrug. I didn't want to believe it either, Cassia, but it just makes sense, doesn't it? Magnus took a step closer, his fists tightening. Tell me where it is. I don't have it. My voice rose, my breath coming faster. I never touched your damn watch, Dad. This is just another one of Ophelia's games, and you're falling for it like you always do. Serafina stepped in then, placing a hand on Magnus's arm. Magnus, please, let's not do this. But he shook her off, his face darkening. Number? No more excuses. I've let this go on long enough. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You have been nothing but a problem since the day you were born. I've given you everything, and this is how you repay me? By stealing from me? I felt my chest tighten, a lifetime of his disappointments crashing down on me all at once. I didn't steal anything, I said, quieter this time, the fight draining out of me. But it didn't matter. It never mattered. Magnus's lips curled into a sneer. I have had enough of you. The words hit harder than any slap. Before I could react, he grabbed my arm. His grip was firm, bruising, and for the first time in my life, I saw something raw in his eyes. Something I had spent my whole life trying to pretend wasn't there. He hated me. Not disappointment. Not frustration. Actual hatred. You're done here, he said, his voice low and final. Ophelia, standing just behind him, watched with amusement. She had won, and she knew it. I yanked my arm free. You're making a mistake. Magnus didn't blink. Number. The mistake was keeping you in this house for so long. He turned and stormed toward the front door, throwing it open so hard it slammed against the wall. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. "Get out!" Serafina gasped. "Magnus, no!" I said, "Get out!" The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at Serafina, waiting for her to say something, to stop this, to fight for me. But she just stood there, her face pale, her eyes filled with an apology she wouldn't say out loud. She wasn't going to stop him. She wasn't going to save me. Slowly, I turned toward Ophelia. She met my gaze, her lips curling into a satisfied smile. "Good luck, loser," she mouthed. I felt my entire body go numb. I wanted to scream, to cry, to fight. But I did none of those things. Instead, I turned on my heel and walked toward the door. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't take anything but my phone, my wallet, and the clothes on my back. And I didn't look back. I stepped out onto the porch, the cool morning air hitting my face like a slap. The world outside felt different. For the first time in my life, I was truly on my own. And I had no idea where to go next. The first night alone was colder than I ever imagined. I pulled my jacket tighter around myself as I walked, the sharp evening air cutting through the thin fabric. I had no destination, no plan, just a backpack slung over my shoulder, and a phone that was barely holding on to its last bit of life. The streets of Houston were quieter than usual, the occasional headlights flashing past me as I wandered aimlessly. I pulled out my phone, my fingers stiff from the chill, and checked the screen. 1% battery. No missed calls, no texts, not even from Mom. I swallowed down the lump rising in my throat. Part of me had hoped, just a little, that she would reach out, that she would fight for me. But hours had passed, and silence had been my only answer. I glanced at the $20 bills in my wallet. $40. That was all I had. A motel was out of the question. If I wanted to make it through more than one night, I had to be smart about what I spent. I stuffed my phone and wallet back into my jacket and kept walking. The first place that seemed even remotely welcoming was a small 24-hour diner on the corner of Main Street. The fluorescent open sign buzzed softly above the door, and the windows were fogged with warmth. I hesitated before stepping inside. The place was nearly empty, just an old man nursing a cup of coffee at the counter, and a couple whispering in the farthest booth. The air smelled like burnt toast and stale grease, but at least it was warm. Sliding into a booth near the entrance, I dug into my pocket and pulled out a few crumpled bills. I had to be careful. A waitress walked up, her expression polite but tired. "What can I get you, hun?" "Just a coffee," I said, handing her a $5. "Black?" She raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything, just nodded and walked away. I sat there, my fingers curled around the chipped tabletop, staring at nothing in particular. I just need somewhere warm for a little while. That was the plan. Just sit, gather my thoughts, and figure out what the hell I was going to do next. But then I heard it. A whisper, not meant for me, but unmistakably about me. "She's just sitting there, hasn't ordered food. You think she's—" Another voice, lower this time. "Let's wait a few more minutes. If she's not ordering, I'll ask her to leave." The waitress, and her manager. I swallowed the shame rising in my chest. My coffee hadn't even arrived yet, and I was already being treated like a problem. I didn't wait. Before they could say anything else, I stood up and walked out, the warmth of the diner disappearing as quickly as it had come. I ended up at a bus stop, not because I had anywhere to go, but because it had a bench. I sat down, hugging my arms around myself, trying to ignore how exposed I felt. This is what it feels like to have nothing. The street was mostly empty, the occasional car passing by, but I could still hear the distant sound of laughter from somewhere down the block. A group of teenagers walked by, their voices carrying in the still night air. One of them whistled. I shifted uncomfortably, pulling my jacket tighter. Don't look at them, don't react. They kept walking, but my heart pounded harder than it should have. I had never felt this vulnerable in my life. For the first time since I had walked out of that house, True fear settled in. I couldn't stay here. I needed to find somewhere else, but I had nowhere left to go. And then, my phone buzzed. I jolted, yanking it out of my pocket so fast I almost dropped it. The screen flickered, battery clinging to life just long enough for me to see the message. Mom. Cassia, where are you? Come home. Please. My breath caught. She had reached out. I stared at the words, my emotions a tangled mess of relief, anger, and exhaustion. I wanted to ignore it, to keep moving forward, to prove to myself that I didn't need any of them, but I wasn't sure I had the strength to. Before I could decide, the screen went black. My phone had died. I exhaled sharply, pressing my palms into my eyes. I guess I have no choice now. I took a deep breath, turned around, and started walking toward the bus station. I didn't know what to expect when I walked through that door, but I knew things would never be the same again. The house loomed before me, its familiar shape casting long shadows under the dim porch light. My breath fogged in the cold air as I hesitated, fingers tightening around the strap of my backpack. I had walked away from this place with no intention of ever coming back. Yet here I was, drawn by a single message from the only person in that house who had ever truly cared. Before I could lift my hand to knock, the door swung open. Serafina stood there, her eyes wide with relief and something else, something that looked like shame. She looked tired, her hair hastily tied back, dark circles underlining her usually warm gaze. "Come inside, Cassia. Please." Her voice was soft, almost pleading. I hesitated for only a second before stepping past her into the entryway. The familiar scent of the house filled my lungs, lavender and old wood polish. But something felt different. It was too quiet. No distant sounds of the television blaring from the living room. No laughter from Ophelia. No commanding voice from Magnus filling the space with authority. Just silence. I swallowed hard. Something was wrong. Serafina led me to the kitchen, motioning for me to sit at the table. The last time I had sat here, I was a child, crying over a scraped knee. Back then, my mother had placed a bandage on my leg, kissed my forehead, and promised me everything would be okay. I wasn't a child anymore, and she couldn't promise me that now. She placed a steaming mug of tea in front of me, sitting down across the table. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded them together. "I should have done something," she said after a moment, her voice thick. "I should have stopped him." I stared at her, emotions warring inside me. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she had fought for me. But had she? Or had she just stood there, watching as Magnus threw me out? "You let it happen," I said quietly, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Serafina's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I tried, Cassia. I begged him to reconsider, but he refused to listen." She shook her head, exhaling shakily. "He's too proud, too blind to see what Ophelia's doing to you." I studied her face, searching for any sign that this time would be different. "Are you finally ready to stand up to him?" I asked. She hesitated, just for a second. And that second told me everything. A noise from the hallway made me stiffen. Footsteps. I turned as Magnus stepped into the kitchen, his presence immediately filling the space. He was composed, arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. Ophelia followed closely behind him, her movements as effortless as ever. She leaned against the doorway, arms folded, her lips curled into an almost smile. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon," she mused. My fingers curled into fists beneath the table. "I bet you didn't." Magnus's gaze swept over me, impassive. His voice was flat when he spoke. "If you've come back expecting an apology, you won't get one." The words shouldn't have surprised me, but they still felt like a slap. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "I didn't come back for you," Magnus scoffed, shaking his head. "Then why are you here?" The air in the kitchen crackled with tension. I could feel the weight of Ophelia's smirk, the smug victory still dancing in her eyes. She thought she had won. Maybe, in a way, she had. I swallowed hard, refusing to let them see me break. I came back because Mom asked me to. Magnus exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. Serafina, this is ridiculous. You shouldn't have brought her back. Serafina didn't move. She didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped forward, placing herself between me and Magnus. No, Magnus. Her voice was steady, stronger than I had ever heard it. She is my daughter, and she is staying here. The room went completely still. Magnus blinked, as if he hadn't heard her correctly. Ophelia's smirk faltered slightly, her confidence shaken by the sudden shift in dynamics. For the first time in years, my mother was standing up for me. I wanted to believe it would last, but I knew this wasn't over yet. The battle lines had been drawn, and Magnus didn't like to lose. The room was thick with tension, the air heavy with something unspoken, yet undeniable. Magnus took a slow step forward, his towering frame casting a shadow over my mother. His expression was dark, eyes narrowed with barely contained fury. You don't get to make decisions in this house, Serafina, he said, his voice dangerously low. Serafina didn't flinch. She held her ground, her back straight, her chin lifted in quiet defiance. I had never seen her like this before, never seen her fight back. This is my house, Magnus, she said firmly. And I say Cassia stays? A silence settled over the room, thick and suffocating. I held my breath, waiting for the explosion. Magnus's hands curled into fists at his sides, his jaw twitching. He had always ruled this house with an iron grip, always had the final say. He wasn't used to being challenged. I could see it in his eyes, the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Ophelia was the first to break the silence. Dad, maybe we should just talk about this. Her voice was smooth, carefully measured. Cassia's obviously upset. I turned to look at her, feeling the anger rise in my chest. Of course, she was playing the peacemaker now, pretending to be the reasonable one. But I knew better. This was just another one of her games. Serafina, however, wasn't fooled anymore. You've done enough, Ophelia, she said, her voice sharp. You and your father have controlled this family for too long. Ophelia's expression faltered for the briefest second. Just a flicker of something behind her eyes. Something that looked an awful lot like fear. This isn't over, Mom, she whispered. I watched the mask slip just for a moment. For the first time, Ophelia wasn't in control, and she knew it. Then Magnus slammed his hand against the kitchen table. The sound was like a gunshot, shattering the tense silence. I flinched, my breath catching in my throat. You don't get to tell me how to run my house, he bellowed, his face red with fury. I felt my pulse spike, adrenaline rushing through my veins. Then his gaze snapped to me, his expression shifting into something darker. You want to stay? His voice was low, almost a growl. Fine, but you follow my rules. One step out of line, and you'll be gone for good. The threat hung in the air between us, suffocating and real. Serafina moved before I could react, stepping between us like a shield. No, Magnus, she said, her voice steady. You don't control her anymore. Magnus's nostrils flared, his eyes wild, but something had shifted. For the first time, he wasn't the one calling the shots. I swallowed, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. This was it. The moment everything truly changed. I took a step forward, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. You're right, Dad, I said, each word slow and deliberate. This is your house. His expression flickered with something unreadable. But it's not my home. The words sliced through the air like a blade. Magnus's face hardened, but he didn't speak. I turned to my mother. Mom, if you really mean what you said, then prove it. Serafina's breath hitched. Her fingers curled into fists at her sides. Then, slowly, she turned back to Magnus. She met his eyes, her voice calm but unwavering. I will. The next morning, Mom made an appointment with a divorce lawyer. I found her sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in front of her, untouched. Her phone was still in her hand, her fingers hovering just above the screen, as if she were considering undoing whatever she had just done. I hesitated before stepping closer. "Mom?" She looked up at me, her face unreadable. Then, with a breath that seemed to release years of held tension, she said, "I made the call. I have an appointment this afternoon." I stared at her, the words taking a second to sink in. "You're serious?" A small, humorless laugh escaped her. "I should have done this years ago." I sat down across from her, searching her face for any hesitation, any sign that she was wavering. There was fear in her eyes, but underneath it, something stronger. Resolve. Magnus had no idea what was coming. The rest of the morning passed in tense silence. Mom kept busy, cleaning, organizing drawers, folding clothes that didn't need folding. I could see it in the way she moved, the restless energy of someone standing at the edge of a cliff, waiting for the right moment to jump. I didn't say much. What was there to say? Ophelia, however, was watching. She always did. By noon, she finally spoke. "Mom, is something going on?" Serafina barely glanced up from wiping the already clean countertop. "It's nothing you need to worry about." But I saw the way Ophelia's eyes narrowed. She didn't like being kept out of the loop. "Really?" she pressed, her voice laced with suspicion. "Because you've been acting off." Serafina met her gaze, calm and unreadable. "I'm just tired, Ophelia, that's all." For once, Ophelia didn't seem convinced. She lingered in the doorway a second longer before walking away, but I caught the flicker of something behind her carefully constructed mask. Paranoia. She felt it. The shift. And for the first time, she had no idea what was coming next. That evening, the door swung open, and Magnus walked in. I was in the living room when I heard it, the slight pause in his footsteps as he crossed the threshold. He knew. Something was wrong. He set his briefcase down with a little too much force. "What's going on?" Serafina stepped into the hallway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She didn't hesitate. "I've spoken to a lawyer, Magnus. I'm filing for divorce." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, like a rubber band snapping, the tension in the room broke. "You're what?" His voice was sharp, disbelieving. Serafina didn't flinch. "I'm leaving you." I held my breath, waiting for the explosion. It came like a storm, sudden and violent. Magnus's face turned red, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "You think you can just throw me away like garbage?" Serafina met his fury with quiet defiance. "This isn't up for debate." I had never seen her like this. Not once. Magnus took a step forward, his body tense. I moved instinctively, standing between them before I even realized what I was doing. He looked at me, eyes filled with something dangerous. "You think you're strong enough to take me on, Cassia?" His voice was low, menacing, but he wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking through me, at her, at Serafina, and she didn't waver. "You'll regret this," he muttered, voice laced with quiet fury. His gaze flickered between the both of us, as if memorizing the moment. Then, he turned sharply on his heel and stormed up the stairs. The echo of his footsteps rang through the house. Ophelia stood in the hallway, watching with wide, calculating eyes. The war had begun. We didn't know it yet, but Magnus wasn't going to leave quietly. The air in the living room was thick with tension. Magnus stood in the center, pacing like a caged animal, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with barely contained rage. Serafina stood firm, her arms crossed, her posture unnervingly calm. The storm was brewing right in front of her, yet she didn't flinch. "You don't get to do this," Magnus growled, his voice low and dangerous. Serafina met his glare without hesitation. "I already did." The words were like a slap. I saw the flicker of disbelief in Magnus's eyes, the way his breath hitched just slightly. He was losing control, and he knew it. I had spent my entire life watching my mother yield to him, watching her shrink herself down to avoid his anger. But tonight, something was different. She wasn't afraid anymore, and Magnus didn't know what to do with that. Ophelia stormed into the room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Her eyes darted between our parents, her breath shallow. "Mom, you can't do this!" she hissed. Then she turned to Magnus, her voice sharpening. "Dad, do something!" For the first time in my life, I saw my father speechless. Ophelia's face twisted in frustration. She whirled on me, her gaze full of venom. "This is your fault." Her voice wavered, but she tried to mask it with fury. "You poisoned her against us." I didn't respond. I just watched. Because that's when I saw it, the mask slipping. Ophelia wasn't just angry, she was terrified. She wasn't fighting for Magnus. She was fighting for herself, for the cushioned life she had built under his protection. If he lost, she lost too. And that scared her more than anything. Magnus slammed his fist against the table. The force of it made the whole room jump. "I built this house," he snarled. "I paid for everything, and you think you can just erase me?" His voice shook the walls, but Serafina didn't move. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat as he turned toward her, stepping closer. His hands were still shaking, his breathing uneven. I saw something in his eyes then. Something dark. Something dangerous. Serafina must have seen it too, because she took a slow step back, her expression unchanging. Then she spoke, voice steady as steel. "Touch me, and I'll have you arrested." The words cut through the room like a blade. Magnus froze. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his fingers twitching at his sides. He had spent his whole life wielding power over this house, over her. And now, in this moment, he had none. The realization settled into his expression, twisting his rage into something uglier. "You'll regret this," he spat. "Both of you." Then, he turned to Ophelia. "Come on," he ordered. "We're leaving." Ophelia's face paled. She glanced between him and Serafina, hesitating. And then, for the first time, I saw real doubt in her eyes. She didn't move. Magnus let out a sharp breath, disgust flashing across his face. He turned and grabbed his coat, heading for the door without looking back. He walked out alone. The front door slammed behind him, rattling the walls. And as the silence settled over the house, I knew one thing for sure. He'd be back. And when he returned, he wouldn't be coming to talk. The house felt eerily quiet the next morning. No heavy footsteps echoing down the hall. No sharp commands from the kitchen. No tension humming beneath every conversation. For the first time in years, Magnus was gone. And yet, instead of relief, all I felt was unease. I could see it in my mother, too. Serafina moved around the house as if nothing had happened, tidying up, folding laundry, wiping down counters that were already clean. But her movements were too precise, too methodical, like she was trying to convince herself that this was normal. It wasn't. I sat at the kitchen table, watching her in silence. She wasn't ready to admit it, but I knew the truth. This wasn't over. That afternoon, the first blow came. A knock at the door. Not loud, not aggressive, just a single deliberate rap against the wood. Serafina's hands tensed around the dish towel she had been wringing. I stood up instinctively, something cold settling in my stomach. She walked to the door, hesitated for only a second, and pulled it open. A man in a suit stood on the porch, a folder in his hand. "Mrs. Calloway?" he asked. Serafina straightened. "Yes." He handed her the envelope. "You've been served." I heard the sharp inhale of her breath as she took it. The door closed behind her, and she walked back into the kitchen in silence. She set the envelope on the table and slowly opened it. Her face remained unreadable as she skimmed the pages, but I saw her hands tighten just slightly. Then she exhaled. "He's contesting the divorce." I swallowed hard. "What else?" "He wants the house," she said simply. I felt my stomach drop. "He's trying to ruin you." She nodded, but when she finally looked at me, there was no fear in her eyes, only determination. Then we fight. That night, another knock came. This one was hesitant, uncertain. I glanced at the clock, almost midnight. Frowning, I walked to my bedroom door and opened it. Ophelia stood there, arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, we just stared at each other. "Are you lost?" I asked dryly. She huffed, but didn't rise to the bait. "You have to talk to Mom." I raised an eyebrow. "I talk to Mom every day." Ophelia let out an impatient breath. "Dad is going to destroy us all if she goes through with this." I leaned against the doorframe, folding my arms. "Since when do you care?" Ophelia's jaw clenched. "This isn't about me." I tilted my head, studying her. And then I saw it, the flicker of fear beneath her frustration. "This isn't about me, is it?" I said slowly. "You're just scared of losing everything." She flinched, but didn't deny it. I let out a humorless chuckle. "You really thought he'd protect you, didn't you?" Ophelia's eyes darkened. "You don't understand, Cassia. You've never understood." "Then explain it to me," I challenged. She opened her mouth, but no words came. She hesitated for a beat too long, then turned on her heel and walked away. I watched her retreat, the weight of realization pressing down on me. The cracks in her world were starting to show. And she knew it. The phone rang an hour later. Serafina was in the living room, sitting with a book in her lap, though I doubted she had read a single word. When the shrill sound pierced the silence, she didn't even flinch. She reached for the phone, checked the caller ID, and pressed the answer button. "Hello, Magnus," she said, her voice cool. I sat on the couch across from her, my pulse spiking. The voice on the other end was low and measured. "You think you can win this, Serafina?" Serafina's fingers tightened around the phone. "This isn't about winning, Magnus. This is about freedom." A slow, cruel laugh filtered through the speaker. "You'll never be free of me." My skin crawled at the certainty in his voice. Serafina held the phone to her ear for a moment longer. Then, without another word, she hung up. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. I met her gaze. "He's not going to stop," she nodded. "I know." I exhaled. "What do we do now?" She set the phone down, her face unreadable. "We prepare." As Mom hung up, I knew this fight was far from over. We had underestimated him, and that was our first mistake. The next morning, the doorbell rang, its sharp chime slicing through the quiet house. I exchanged a glance with Mom before she stood, moving toward the door with careful steps. A man in a crisp suit stood on the porch, holding a thick envelope in his hands. He gave a polite nod before handing it over. "Mrs. Calloway, you've been served." Mom didn't react. No flinch, no hesitation. She took the papers and shut the door behind her. I watched as she walked to the kitchen table, her movements slow but deliberate. She unfolded the documents, her eyes scanning the words, her fingers tightening around the pages. Then, softly, she murmured, "He wants to leave us with nothing." I stepped closer. "What?" Mom exhaled, pressing her lips together before looking up at me. "He's contesting everything. He wants the house, the assets, full control of the finances." She turned another page, her expression unreadable. "He's claiming he supported this family financially, that I wouldn't have what I do without him." I felt the heat of anger rise in my chest. "That's a lie! You paid for everything. You carried this house while he—" "I know." Her voice was steady, but I saw the way her hands trembled just slightly. I clenched my fists. "Then we won't let him." Ophelia stormed into the kitchen an hour later, the papers clutched in her hand like a weapon. "Mom, you have to stop this!" she snapped, her voice shrill. "He's going to ruin us!" Mom didn't even glance at her. "He's the one doing this, not me." Ophelia's expression twisted, her breathing shallow. "You think this is just about you?" She waved the documents in frustration. "This affects all of us. If he takes the house, he won't." "But what if he does?" Ophelia's voice wavered. Maybe if we just talk to him? I let out a sharp laugh, cutting her off. Talk to him? Since when has talking to him ever changed anything? Ophelia shot me a glare, but this time there was something beneath it. Uncertainty. She was finally realizing she had bet on the wrong side. 2 days later, we sat in the courtroom, waiting for the first hearing to begin. The air was thick with tension, the cold sterility of the room doing nothing to settle my nerves. I sat beside Mom, my hands folded tightly in my lap, trying to appear composed. Then the doors opened. Magnus walked in, his suit crisp, his expression composed. A lawyer followed closely behind him, briefcase in hand, his movements precise and confident. Magnus's gaze swept over us, a slow smirk curling at the edges of his lips. He looked like a man who had already won. The hearing began. His lawyer was the first to speak, his voice smooth and practiced. Your Honor, my client has provided for this household for years. His financial contributions ensured the stability of his family, and it is only fair that he be awarded the majority of shared assets, including the home. I felt my nails dig into my palm. Lies. Mom's lawyer didn't even blink before responding. Your Honor, the plaintiff has not contributed financially for years. In fact, Mrs. Calloway was the sole provider of this household, paying the mortgage, utilities, and all household expenses. Any claims to financial contribution are unfounded. Magnus's smirk faltered. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his expression, something uncertain. For the first time, he wasn't in control. The hearing was brief, just the beginning of what would be a long battle. As we walked out of the courthouse, I could feel his presence behind us, his steps slow and deliberate. And then, just as we reached the exit, he leaned in close to Mom, his voice low. You think you've won, Serafina, he murmured. This is only the beginning. Mom didn't react, didn't even acknowledge him. She just kept walking, her back straight, her face unreadable. But I turned, just enough to meet his gaze. And I saw it. Beneath the anger, beneath the bravado, there was something else. Fear. I had spent my whole life fearing my father, but now, for the first time, I realized he was afraid of us, and that made him more dangerous than ever. At first, it was subtle, a flicker of the lights in the kitchen, the hum of electricity stuttering, just for a second. A power outage that lasted only a moment, long enough to make my mother pause, glancing up from her book. Probably just the wiring, she murmured, but I wasn't so sure. Then the bank called. Mom stood at the counter, phone pressed to her ear, her grip tightening as she listened. What do you mean my account was frozen? Her voice was calm, but I could hear the undercurrent of unease. The conversation ended quickly, and when she turned to me, her face was unreadable. Someone tried to put a hold on my accounts, she said. The bank flagged it as fraud. I didn't have to ask who. And then the car appeared. A dark sedan parked just across the street. Not always there, not all night, but enough that I noticed. Enough that it sent a chill down my spine. I sat on the couch one evening, staring at it through the window. The engine was running. Someone was inside. But they never got out. He's trying to scare us, I murmured. Mom stood behind me, arms crossed. No, she exhaled. He's trying to break us. Ophelia was quieter than usual. She moved through the house like a ghost. Her usual arrogance faded. I caught her watching Mom more than once, studying her like she was trying to read between the lines of something unspoken. One evening, she slid into the seat across from me at the dining table. We should talk to Dad, she said suddenly. Try to calm him down. I set my fork down, staring at her in disbelief. Are you serious? Ophelia didn't meet my eyes. You're scared, I realized. You think he's going to come after you next. She exhaled, rubbing her hands together, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. For the first time, I saw it. She wasn't just a manipulator, she was a product of him. And now, without his protection, she was just as lost as the rest of us. The pounding on the door woke me in an instant. I bolted upright, my heart hammering. It was nearly 2 a.m. Another loud bang echoed through the house. I threw off my blanket and rushed to my window, peering down. My stomach turned to ice. It was Magnus. Serafina was already in the hallway when I stepped out, her face pale but composed. "Don't open it," she whispered. The pounding continued. "You think you can take everything from me?" Magnus's voice boomed through the door, raw with fury. I pressed myself against the wall, my breath shallow. Then, bang! Glass shattered somewhere downstairs. Mom flinched, then grabbed her phone, dialing. "I'm calling the police!" Magnus laughed from outside, a dark, guttural sound. "You think they can protect you?" I swallowed hard, my pulse racing. This wasn't going to end with words. By the time the police arrived, Magnus was gone. They took our statements, glanced at the shattered window, and nodded solemnly as Mom filed for a restraining order. But we all knew it wouldn't stop him. Ophelia sat on the couch, staring at the shards of glass scattered across the floor, her face unreadable. For the first time, I saw true fear in her eyes. I turned to my mother, my voice quiet but firm. "We have to end this. Before he does. Because if we didn't stop him now, we might not get another chance." And Magnus was about to prove exactly how far he was willing to go. The morning after the attack, the house felt different. Not just because of the shattered window or the cold breeze that snuck in through the temporary plastic covering. It was something else, something heavier. Mom stood in the living room, staring at the glass shards still scattered on the floor. She held the phone to her ear, speaking in hushed, clipped tones. I knew who she was talking to. Her lawyer. "We're moving forward with a restraining order," she said, her voice steady, "and I want to discuss the financial dispute." I watched her, noticing how stiff her posture was, how the exhaustion clung to her shoulders. She had always carried so much weight, but for the first time, I could see it wearing her down. "I should have done this years ago," she whispered as she hung up. I swallowed, nodding, but there was a pit in my stomach. "It won't stop him. He won't let us go that easily." She turned to me, her gaze unwavering. "Then we won't make it easy for him either." By noon, another letter arrived. I saw the official-looking envelope before Mom did. My stomach twisted as I picked it up from the mailbox, my fingers tightening around it. The return address was from Magnus's lawyer. Another attack. Mom took the envelope from me, her expression unreadable as she tore it open and unfolded the papers. Her eyes moved across the page, and then, just for a second, I saw it. The flicker of unease. "He's demanding financial compensation," she murmured. I frowned. "What?" "He's claiming he contributed to the home's finances and is entitled to half of everything." My blood boiled. "That's a lie." Mom exhaled through her nose, setting the papers down with deliberate calm. "Of course it is." I watched her closely, noticing how her hands trembled before she balled them into fists. "He's trying to bleed you dry," I said. She lifted her chin. "Let him try." But I knew the truth. This wasn't just about money. This battle wasn't going to end in court. It was about to get personal. Ophelia was pacing when I walked into the kitchen later that evening. The house had been quiet since the letter arrived, but she was anything but. Her arms were folded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Mom," she started, hesitant. "Maybe we should settle. Maybe it's not worth it." I stiffened. Mom turned from the sink, giving Ophelia a sharp look. "Are you suggesting we let him win?" Ophelia's mouth opened, then closed. I exhaled slowly, watching her closely. "You're scared," I said. She flinched, but didn't deny it. "He's our father, Cassia." Her voice was quieter now, almost pleading. The air between us grew heavy. For so long, I had resented her, hated the way she always took his side, the way she always stood in his shadow. But now I saw it clearly. She wasn't just complicit, she was trapped, but that didn't mean I was going to save her, and I wasn't going to let her drag us down with her. "The lines have been drawn, Ophelia," I said finally. Pick a side. She didn't answer. Maybe she already had. That night, the final warning came. I had been walking past the front door when something caught my eye. A thin white envelope barely sticking out from beneath the doorframe. I hesitated before reaching for it, dread curling in my gut as I pulled it inside. Inside, there was only a single sheet of paper. A note. You can't hide behind the law forever. I always win. No signature, no threats spelled out. Just a message, a promise. I clenched my fists, my pulse pounding in my ears. I turned to Mom, handing her the letter. She read it, her expression unreadable, then set it down. She didn't look afraid. She looked furious. It's time to end this, I said, voice steady. Once and for all. Magnus had declared war, and we were finally ready to fight back. The night before the final hearing, I had a feeling something bad was going to happen. I just didn't know how right I was. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Mom was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters for the third time that evening. She wasn't cleaning. She was keeping herself busy, distracting herself from the inevitable. Tomorrow, it's over, she murmured, more to herself than to me. One more day and we're free. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust that the judge would see through Magnus's lies, that the restraining order would hold, that the law would finally be on our side. But something inside me wouldn't settle. Magnus wasn't the kind of man who accepted defeat. I woke up to a sound that didn't belong. A soft creak, barely audible over the hum of the heater. I held my breath, straining to listen. Another sound, closer this time, the stairs. I grabbed my phone, heart hammering, and slid out of bed as quietly as possible. I crept toward my door, inching it open just enough to see the hallway. And then I saw it. A shadow moving through the living room. The front door was still locked. No windows were broken. He had a key. I clenched my jaw, swallowing down the rising panic. Serafina's door creaked open, and she stepped out, her expression turning to stone the moment she spotted him. "Get out!" she said, her voice firm but shaking slightly. Magnus turned toward her, smiling like he had just walked in from work instead of breaking into the house in the middle of the night. "You really thought a piece of paper could stop me?" He took a slow step forward. "You're ruining this family, Serafina. You always were weak." I moved before I could think, stepping between them. "You lost this family the moment you chose yourself over all of us," I shot back, my voice steady. Something snapped in his eyes. He lunged. His hand clamped down on my arm, fingers digging into my skin. Pain shot through me, but I refused to let him see it. Then, crash! Mom swung a lamp into his shoulder, the sound of shattering glass piercing the air. Magnus stumbled back, his face contorted with shock. For the first time, he looked truly afraid. And then, before he could recover, sirens. Blue and red lights flashed through the windows. I saw the moment he realized it was over. The front door burst open, and officers rushed in. They had barely pulled him away before he turned back, his eyes burning with hatred. "You think this is over?" he growled. Mom stepped forward, her chin lifted, her voice unwavering. "Yes, I do." Magnus's jaw clenched, but this time he had no power left. The officers led him out, his footsteps heavy against the floor. And then, silence. I exhaled, my whole body trembling. I turned to Mom. For the first time, our house belonged to us. But the damage he left behind would take longer to fix. The next morning, we stood in court for the final time. This time, without fear. The air inside the courthouse was sterile, the walls a dull shade of beige. But for the first time, I didn't feel suffocated by them. This place had been a battleground for months, a place where Magnus had tried to manipulate, control, and destroy us. But today, we weren't the ones on trial. I glanced at my mother. She sat beside me, her hands folded neatly in her lap. There was no shaking, no hesitation, just quiet strength. Then, the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Magnus was led inside, his hands cuffed in front of him. His once pristine suit was wrinkled, his face unshaven. The arrogance that had always radiated from him was gone, replaced with something else: defeat. The judge's voice echoed through the chamber. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, the court has reached its final decision. I held my breath. Full ownership of the property and financial assets is awarded to Serafina Calloway. Relief crashed over me like a wave. The divorce is officially granted, with no financial obligations to the defendant. Mom exhaled slowly. And given Mr. Calloway's repeated violations of the restraining order, combined with his recent acts of violence, this court is issuing a formal sentence which will be carried out immediately. I looked at Magnus, expecting him to fight, to protest, to do what he always did, make himself the victim, but he just sat there, staring ahead. For the first time in his life, he was powerless. Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp and cool. The weight I had carried for years had finally started to lift. I was about to head toward the car when I heard my name. Cassia, wait. I turned, already knowing who it was. Ophelia. She stood a few feet away, her arms wrapped around herself, her expression uncharacteristically hesitant. I need to talk to you. I crossed my arms. Why? Ophelia swallowed, shifting her weight from foot to foot. I didn't know he'd go this far, she said quietly. I thought he was just trying to scare you. I let out a humorless laugh. You thought he was scaring us for fun? She winced. She hesitated. I don't want to lose my family. Something in me tensed, waiting for the anger, the resentment, the years of pain to surge forward. But I felt nothing. You already did. Ophelia's lips parted, but no words came. She knew it was true. For once in her life, she had to face the consequences. I turned away, walking toward the car without looking back. The house felt different when we stepped inside. Lighter. I stood in the middle of the living room, taking it all in. The same walls, the same furniture, the same space that had once felt like a cage. But now, for the first time, it felt like something else. Ours. Mom handed me a cup of coffee, sitting beside me on the couch. So, I murmured, staring at the quiet sunlit room. What now? She smiled. A small, tired, but real smile. Now, she said, we live. For the first time in my life, home wasn't a prison. It was exactly what it was supposed to be, ours. But even as we tried to move forward, the ghosts of the past weren't ready to let us go. The house was quiet. Too quiet. A week had passed since the court ruling, since Magnus had been taken away, since the war had officially ended. And yet, every time the floor creaked or the wind pushed against the windows, my body tensed, waiting for something that wasn't coming. Mom and I fell into a new routine: morning coffee in the kitchen, the absence of whispered arguments behind closed doors, the relief of knowing that no one was lurking just around the corner, waiting to strike. It should have been peaceful. It should have been freeing. But instead, it felt empty. Mom caught me flinching one evening when a car door slammed outside. She didn't say anything at first, just watched me with quiet understanding. It's going to take time, she finally murmured. I nodded, but deep down, I wasn't sure if time would ever be enough. The knock on the door came on a Thursday afternoon. I almost didn't answer it, but something in me knew. When I pulled the door open, Ophelia stood there. She looked different, not the perfectly polished, immaculately composed version of herself I had grown up with. She looked small, tired. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, she said, I don't have anywhere else to go. I exhaled, 1,000 responses flashing through my mind. And what do you expect me to do about that? And that's my problem. How? And you had a place. You chose to burn it down. But instead, all I said was, Why are you here, Ophelia? She swallowed hard, shifting on her feet. I don't know. I don't know who I am without him. Her voice cracked on the last word. Magnus. She wasn't here for redemption. She wasn't here to undo the past. She was here because, for the first time in her life, she had no one to hide behind. I didn't invite her in right away. Instead, I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her like I had never really looked at her before. I'm not going to forget what you did, I said finally, and I don't know if I'll ever forgive you. She nodded, the weight of those words settling in. I don't deserve it anyway, she murmured. Silence stretched between us. Two sisters who were never really sisters. After a long pause, I pushed the door open just enough to let her step inside. Not because I trusted her, not because things would ever be okay between us, but because, for the first time, she wasn't pretending. Maybe this wasn't an ending. Maybe it was just the in-between. No matter how much we tried to outrun it, the past would always be a part of us. A month had passed since the courtroom, since Magnus had been taken away, since we had finally won. Life without him was different. There was space now, a quietness in the house that hadn't existed before. The air felt lighter, as if we had been holding our breath for years, and only now were allowed to exhale. Mom filled the silence in small ways. She repainted the kitchen, rearranged the furniture, started attending yoga classes at the community center. I watched as she slowly rediscovered herself, piece by piece, reclaiming the life that had always been hers. I threw myself into work, no longer carrying the weight of my father's judgment every time I stepped into my office. For the first time, my life was my own. But the scars remained. I still tensed when I heard an unexpected noise in the house. Mom still hesitated before answering an unknown number. Some nights, I lay awake, replaying his last words in my head. You think this is over? I knew better than to think trauma had an expiration date. One evening, as we sat on the porch, sipping tea, I finally voiced the thought that had been haunting me. It doesn't just go away, does it? Mom sighed, staring out at the dimming sky. No, she admitted, but it gets quieter. Ophelia had been staying with us for a few days, but we all knew it wasn't permanent. She didn't belong here anymore. I saw it in the way she hesitated before entering a room, the way she avoided real conversations, the way she glanced toward the front door as if debating whether to walk through it for good. One evening, she finally said it. I think I'm going to leave town. I looked up from my book, raising an eyebrow. Running away? She shrugged. Starting over. I searched her face, looking for something. Remorse, regret, even the slightest hint of self-awareness. But there was nothing, just exhaustion. And for the first time in my life, I felt no anger toward her, no bitterness, just acceptance. Do whatever you want, Ophelia, I said, closing my book, but don't expect me to save you next time. She nodded, as if she already knew that. The next morning, she was gone. No goodbyes, no long explanations, just a quiet exit. And honestly, that was probably the way it was always meant to be. I stepped onto the porch that afternoon, looking at the house that had once felt like my prison. The walls were the same. The doors, the windows, the floors, they were all still there. But it felt different now. Lighter. Like maybe, just maybe, it could be something else. Mom joined me, coffee in hand, her expression calm. So, what now? I asked. She smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. Now we build something new. I nodded. For the first time, I believed that was possible. We weren't healed yet, but we were free. And maybe that was enough for now. Life doesn't always give us the closure we want. Sometimes healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to live with the scars. I spent years believing I was powerless, trapped in a home that never felt like mine. But the truth is, freedom isn't given. It's taken. We don't heal overnight. The past lingers. The pain echoes. But we move forward anyway. Because strength isn't about never falling. It's about standing up every time we do. If this story spoke to you, if you believe in resilience, in reclaiming your voice, then stay. There's more to share, more to heal, more to grow. Subscribe, and let's walk this journey together.